The law of vibration sounds simple until you actually try to apply it. You're told to raise your vibration, think positive thoughts, feel grateful, and stay in a high vibration. But the moment you actually try to do it, something strange happens. You start wondering if you're really in a high vibration. You start monitoring your own emotions, asking, am I doing this right? And suddenly you're aware of every negative thought more than before. And it turns into a loop because you try to feel better because you want better results, but that very effort, it makes you more aware of not feeling good enough. And if you've ever tried to apply this, you've probably felt it, which raises a few uncomfortable questions like, if vibration is just an emotion, why do positive people still struggle? Or why do stressed, anxious people sometimes succeed anyway? Or if I feel off for a day, have I ruined my progress? These aren't small questions because they determine whether this actually works or just sounds good in theory. Now, where it gets interesting is, I don't think the common explanations of vibration are wrong, I just think they're incomplete because they tell you what to do, but they almost never explain what vibration actually is in the first place. And without understanding that, you're left trying to control how you feel. You try to stay positive, you try to avoid negative thoughts, you try to raise your vibration, but none of that feels stable because you're trying to manage something without understanding what's actually creating it. So maybe the real question isn't how do I raise my vibration? Maybe the better question is, what is vibration really? Now, what if vibration isn't an emotion at all? What if excitement, fear, confidence, anxiety, joy, frustration, they're just simply expressions of something happening underneath? Think about your body for a moment and let's say imagine you just received wonderful news. Your posture changes, your breathing changes, your facial expression changes, your thoughts change, even the way you walk changes. Now imagine the opposite. Let's say you're worried about something important. Nothing outside you has necessarily changed yet, but your shoulders tighten. Your breathing, it becomes shallow. Your attention narrows, your thoughts become more repetitive, and you begin imagining worst case scenarios. The emotion changed, but so did everything else. Your body, your attention, your expectations, your behavior, they're all moving together, and that's because they're all being influenced by something larger. The larger pattern is what we'll call your state. A state is, let's say, the overall condition your mind and body are operating from. It's not just what you're feeling, it's the entire mode you're functioning in. Your emotional tone, your habitual thoughts, where your attention naturally goes, how your body responds, how safe or threatened your nervous system feels, all of these work together. Now, why this distinction matters is because most people they ask, how do I feel right now? But that's actually the wrong question because emotions they change constantly. You can feel excited in the morning, frustrated after lunch, relaxed in the evening, and grateful before going to bed. And if vibration were simply emotion, your vibration would be changing every few hours and sometimes every few minutes. And that doesn't make much sense. A much better question is, what state am I constantly living from? Because while emotions they come and go, states they tend to persist. For example, someone can have a difficult afternoon while still living from an overall state of confidence. However, at the other end, someone can be actually laughing at a party while still living from an underlying state of insecurity. The temporary emotion changes, the deeper state, it often remains the same. And once you begin seeing this difference, the law of vibration, it starts becoming much more logical. You no longer have to panic every time you experience a negative emotion. You no longer have to pretend that you're happy when you're not. And you no longer have to obsess over whether your vibration has dropped because you had one bad day. Instead, you begin paying attention to something much more important. The state you're repeatedly returning to. Because that state, it quietly influences almost everything that follows. Not through magic, not because the universe is keeping score, but because your state changes how you experience reality itself. And that's the missing piece almost every explanation leaves out. Because most people think vibration changes reality directly. But what if the first thing it actually changes is you? Because once you change the way you experience reality, everything else begins changing naturally. And that's where the real mechanism begins. So if your state changes the way you experience reality, how exactly does that happen? By the way, what I'm sharing isn't just theory, it's what took me from being a lawyer to starting my own companies, making six figures in my mid-20s, and later negotiating multi-million dollar deals. Now, this is the point where many explanations, they suddenly kind of become vague. Like they'll say things like your vibration attracts matching frequencies, or the universe responds to your energy, but they never explain how that response actually unfolds in your everyday life. Let's fill in that missing mechanism, and it starts with something so ordinary that most people never notice it: your attention. At every moment, your brain is receiving an overwhelming amount of information. For example, the color of the walls around you, the sounds outside, the feeling of your clothes against your skin, the expressions of people's faces, the countless objects sitting in your peripheral vision. If your conscious mind tried to process all of it at once, it would be impossible. So your brain does something remarkable. It filters. It decides what's important and quietly ignores everything else. Now the interesting part is that filter is not random. It's heavily influenced by the state you're already in. For example, think about the last time you were deeply worried about something. Maybe let's say you were waiting for an important phone call, or you were preparing for an interview, or you were just wondering whether a relationship was going to work out. What happened? Suddenly, your attention, it became incredibly selective. You noticed every possible sign that something might go wrong. A delayed reply suddenly felt significant. A small change in someone's tone, it seemed meaningful. Tiny details that normally wouldn't matter, it became impossible to ignore. Now, compare that with the day when you felt genuinely confident. The entire world looked different. The same conversation, it felt easier. The same uncertainty felt manageable. The same challenge, it felt interesting instead of threatening. Did the world change? No. Your state changed. And because your state changed, your attention changed. And this happens constantly. So someone, let's say, living from a state of scarcity, they would naturally notice what's missing. Whereas at the same time, someone living from a state of abundance naturally notices possibilities. Someone living from insecurity notices rejection. Someone living from confidence notices opportunity. The external world hasn't become two different worlds. Two different minds are simply selecting two different pieces of the same reality. And once your attention changes, something else changes with it: your interpretation. For example, imagine two people, they receive the exact same feedback from their boss. Let's say the boss says that this presentation is good, but it could be better. One person immediately thinks, I'm not good enough, I'm disappointing everyone, I knew I wasn't capable. The other person hears the exact same words and thinks, great, now I know what to improve, or this is useful, or next time I will be even better. Same words, different meaning, because events don't automatically create interpretation, your state does. And once your interpretation changes, your behavior changes almost automatically. You begin speaking differently, you ask different questions, you notice different opportunities, you avoid different risks, you persist a little longer, or you quit a little sooner, you introduce yourself to someone, or you convince yourself not to. You send the application, or you decide you're not probably qualified anyways. Most of these decisions, they don't feel dramatic. In fact, they rarely feel like decisions at all. They simply kind of feel obvious choices. And that's exactly why they're so powerful. Because when a behavior feels obvious, you usually don't question it. You assume you're just being realistic. But what feels realistic is often being shaped by the state you're already living from. Now imagine these tiny differences repeating day after day after day. Maybe one extra conversation, one additional opportunity, one slightly better decision, one moment of persistence instead of giving up. Each individual choice seems insignificant, but over weeks, months and years, they compound. And eventually, the experiences you're creating, it begins to reflect those accumulated choices. Then something fascinating happens. Your mind, it looks at those experiences and quietly says, see, I knew this is how life works. If you've been operating from fear, every setback becomes evidence that your fear was justified. If you've been operating from confidence, every small success becomes evidence that confidence makes sense. Without realizing it, you've entered a feedback loop. Your state, it influences what you notice. What you notice influences how you interpret events. Your interpretation influences your behavior, and your behavior creates experiences. And those experiences reinforce the original state you started with. Then the cycle begins again. This is why patterns can become so deeply ingrained, not because the universe has decided to keep giving you the same lessons, or not because you're cursed or because your negative thoughts ruined your future, but because your state has been quietly shaped by thousands of small moments that eventually create larger patterns. This is also why changing your life rarely happens through one burst of motivation. Motivation is temporary, states are more enduring. Like you can feel inspired after watching a video or reading a book or even attending a seminar. For a few hours, everything feels possible. Then a week later, you're back where you started. And why? Because inspiration briefly changed your emotions. It didn't necessarily change the state you consistently return to. And that's an incredibly important distinction. If your underlying state doesn't change, your attention gradually returns to its old patterns. Your interpretations become familiar again. Your behaviors drift back to what feels normal, and eventually your results begin looking exactly like they did before. This is why people often say, I know what to do, I just can't seem to stay consistent. The problem usually isn't a lack of information, it's that information alone doesn't automatically change your state. Once you understand this, the law of vibration begins to look very different, because it's not asking you to manufacture positive emotions every morning. It's not asking you to smile through pain. It's not even asking you to suppress difficult feelings. Instead, it's inviting you to understand the deeper condition from which your thoughts, emotions, attention, and behavior naturally arise. Because that's the level where lasting change actually begins. And once you see vibration through this lens, one of the biggest myths surrounding the law of vibration, it completely falls apart. The idea that being in a high vibration means feeling happy all the time. It doesn't. In fact, that misunderstanding may be the very thing keeping so many people stuck. So if vibration isn't about forcing yourself to stay happy, what does it actually change? Let's make this practical, and I want you to imagine two people pursuing the exact same goal. Maybe let's say they're both trying to build a business, or maybe they're both applying for the same promotion, or maybe they're just both trying to improve their relationships. From the outside, they appear remarkably similar. Like they're working hard, they put in the hours, they face rejection, they experience uncertainty. Life doesn't give either of them a free pass, but internally they're operating from very different states. The first person lives from a state of chronic scarcity, because underneath every decision is the quiet belief that things probably won't work out. Every delay, it feels threatening. Every rejection, it feels personal, and every obstacle feels like proof that they're falling behind. When something goes wrong, their mind immediately asks, what does this say about me? And because that's the question they're asking, that's the answer they keep finding. They hesitate before taking risks, they second guess good opportunities, they overanalyze simple decisions, and they spend more energy protecting themselves from failure rather than moving towards success. Now, consider the second person. This person is not endlessly positive. They also feel disappointed. They still get frustrated. They also experience fear. The difference is not the absence of difficult emotions. The difference is the state they're returning to. Because for them, their underlying state is of confidence. Not certainty, not arrogance, confidence. When something doesn't go as planned, they don't immediately question their worth. Instead, they ask, what can I learn from this, or what needs to change, and how can I adjust? The setback is still uncomfortable, but it's not an identity, it's information. And because they interpret it differently, they respond differently. They stay engaged, they remain curious, they recover faster, and they continue taking meaningful action. Now here's something very important. Neither person's external circumstances determined their state, and neither person's state eliminated challenges. The confident person still encounters obstacles. The anxious person still experiences success from time to time. Life is never that simple. The law of vibration isn't saying that one positive thought will magically transform reality. It's saying something much more subtle. Your dominant state influences how you meet reality. And over time, that changes the reality you experience. This is why two people can live through nearly identical situations and walk away with completely different lives. Not because the universe played favorites, but because they repeatedly saw different possibilities, made different choices, and created different patterns. Now we can finally clear up one of the biggest misunderstandings surrounding the law of vibration, that raising your vibration doesn't mean pretending everything is okay when it isn't. It doesn't mean suppressing grief. It doesn't mean ignoring fear. It doesn't mean forcing gratitude while you're silently exhausted. It doesn't mean smiling through suffering because you're afraid a negative emotion will attract more negativity. In fact, trying to perform positivity all the time often creates even more internal resistance, because now you're not only struggling, you're also judging yourself for struggling. Real emotional health doesn't come from denying difficult emotions, it comes from allowing them to move through without letting them become the place you permanently live from. That's a completely different idea. You can experience sadness without becoming someone who lives in hopelessness. You can experience fear without allowing fear to become your default lens for interpreting life. You can feel uncertainty while still operating from a fundamentally grounded state. And that's the distinction that changes everything, because emotions are temporary visitors, state becomes your home. Your vibration is the state you consistently live from, and that state shapes what you notice, how you interpret what happens, and the actions you repeatedly take. Stop asking, how do I raise my vibration? And start asking, what state am I practicing every day? Because the life you experience tomorrow is shaped by the state you repeatedly choose today. If you also want to see the same breakdown for the law of detachment or quantum manifestation, the links are in the description and on your screen, and I'll see you there.